You'll never survive without my son's fortune, my mother-in-law Spat, her designer heels clicking across my now empty office. A little gold-digging secretary like you? Pathetic. I smirked, adjusting my glasses. She had no idea the game ended days ago, and she already lost. You'll never survive without my son's fortune. My mother-in-law Spat, her designer heels clicking across my now empty office. A little gold-digging secretary like you? Pathetic. I smirked, adjusting my glasses. The nameplate that once read Elizabeth Moore, executive assistant, was already packed away in the cardboard box at my feet. The walls were bare, stripped of Cole's photographs and my diplomas. The emptiness felt purposeful, like the calm before a storm. What do you have to say for yourself? Vivian demanded, her perfectly manicured nails tapping impatiently against her Hermes handbag. At 63 she still commanded attention with her steel gray bob and tailored Chanel suit, a fortress of wealth and privilege. I think we're done here, Vivian, I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. The movers already took everything important. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to thank each of you for being part of this incredible journey. If you're enjoying these stories of empowerment, consider subscribing. It's completely free and helps us build this amazing community. Let's dive in. Her eyes narrowed, scanning the barren desk for something, anything, that might reveal my next move. You think you can just walk away with what belongs to my family? To Blackwood Industries. I'm only taking what's mine. I stood, smoothing my simple black dress, the same one I'd worn to Cole's funeral 3 weeks ago. What Cole wanted me to have. That's rich, she scoffed. My son was worth $50 million, and you think a nobody from nowhere deserves any of it? I reached for my box, memories flooding back of my first day in this very office, nearly 5 years ago. The elevator doors had opened to the 30th floor of the Blackwood Tower, and my stomach lurched with nervousness, not from the height but from what awaited me. My sensible heels sank into plush carpeting as I approached the reception desk. Elizabeth Moore for Mr. Blackwood, I'd said, clutching my folder of references. The receptionist had barely looked up. New secretary? Her tone suggested I wouldn't last a week. Executive assistant. I'd corrected gently, though the distinction meant little to most. What nobody knew was that I'd spent 3 years at the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network before burnout and bureaucracy pushed me toward a career change. This position was my fresh start. Simpler, cleaner, but with purpose. I'd researched Blackwood Industries thoroughly, noting several financial patterns that raised flags. Nothing concrete, but enough to pique my professional curiosity. Mr. Cole Blackwood's office had been intimidating that first day. Corner suite, floor-to-ceiling windows, modern art that probably cost more than my student loans. But Cole himself had been unexpectedly kind, offering coffee he'd made himself rather than asking me to fetch it. Sorry about the mess, he'd said, gesturing to perfectly organized stacks of reports. Mother insists I need an assistant who can handle my chaos, but honestly I just need someone who can handle my mother. I'd laughed, not realizing how prophetic those words would become. Remember when you had me investigated? I asked Vivian, now picking up a forgotten paperclip from the desk. 3 months after Cole and I started dating? Her perfect jawline tightened. Standard procedure. I protect my family. The private investigator you hired was thorough, I continued. Except he missed my stint at fencing. Funny how that works. You were so busy looking for dirt for evidence I was sleeping my way to the top that you missed the actual truth. What are you talking about? There was the faintest tremor in her voice now. Cole found it amusing too when I finally told him. I smiled at the memory of his laughter, the way his eyes had crinkled at the corners, that the fearsome Vivian Blackwood had a former financial crimes investigator working right under her nose. A flash of uncertainty crossed her face, quickly replaced by practiced disdain. Whatever game you're playing, it's not a game, Vivian. It never was. Cole and I had started as nothing more than boss and assistant. I'd kept things strictly professional even when I noticed his lingering glances, his excuses to work late when I stayed to finish projects. The company had strict policies against workplace relationships, policies I'd respected. It was the company Christmas party that changed everything. Cole had found me on the rooftop terrace, escaping the forced merriment below. Not one for office parties? He'd asked, offering his jacket against the December chill. Not one for pretending, I'd answered honestly. Everyone downstairs is networking, not celebrating. He'd smiled ruefully. Including my mother. She's currently corralling the board members like sheep. That night we talked for hours about everything except work, books, travel, our shared love of old jazz records. When he'd asked me to dinner the following week, I'd hesitated. I don't date my boss, I'd told him. Fair enough, he'd replied. What if I wasn't your boss anymore? 2 weeks later I'd been transferred to the legal department. Same pay, different supervisor. Our first date had been at a hole-in-the-wall diner where nobody would recognize the heir to the Blackwood fortune. Cole loved me, I told Vivian, who was now pacing the office like a caged animal. Not because I was convenient or ambitious, but because I saw him. Not his money, not his last name, just him. Please, she sneered. You played him perfectly. The wholesome girl next door act. All those secrets about feeling intimidated by our world while you were counting every penny you could get your hands on. I had to admire her commitment to her narrative. Even as her world crumbled, Vivian Blackwood couldn't imagine being wrong. You never approved of us, I said, stating the obvious. The secretary who seduced the boss's son. Too common, too plain, too everything you despise. You weren't good enough for him. Her voice was ice. You still aren't. The day Cole had proposed, he'd apologized, that his mother would make our lives difficult. When she refused to attend our small wedding, he'd been hurt but not surprised. Each time she'd accidentally scheduled important family events when I was out of town, or seated me at the far end of the table at rare family dinners, or referred to me as Cole's current situation. He'd grown more distant from her. What Vivian never understood was that her rejection had only strengthened our bond. Every dismissive comment, every thinly veiled insult had pushed Cole further into building a life separate from his family's expectations. Let me explain something, Vivian, I said, lifting my box. The game ended days ago and you already lost. Her perfect composure fractured. What does that mean? I stepped closer, dropping my voice. It means that while you were busy planning how to cut me out after Cole's death, I was executing the plan he and I made together. It means your son discovered your offshore accounts in the Caymans and Bermuda 8 months ago. Her face went ashen. You're lying. The IRS doesn't think so. I checked my watch. In fact, they should be serving a search warrant at your estate right about now. The look of comprehension dawning across her features was worth every moment of grief and struggle I'd endured. You didn't just lose your son, Vivian, I said quietly. You lost everything because you couldn't see past your own prejudice to recognize who I really was or who Cole had become. I walked past her to the door, turning back one last time to see the formidable Vivian Blackwood standing speechless in the empty office that had once been my first step into her world. Goodbye, Vivian, I said. Tax fraud carries quite a sentence these days. I'd start calling your lawyers. As I walked toward the elevator, I felt Cole's presence beside me, heard his voice in my head. You did it, Lizzie. You really did it. The game was over. And despite the emptiness in my heart where Cole should be, I'd won. The elevator doors closed behind me, sealing off Vivian's world as I descended from the 30th floor. In my hands, the cardboard box contained 5 years of memories. The tangible ones, at least. The more precious ones lived in my heart. Cole's smile when he brought me coffee each morning, his laughter during our weekend escapes to his cabin in the mountains, the way his eyes softened when he talked about our future. Our worlds couldn't have been more different. I grew up in a modest 3-bedroom house in Rochester, the daughter of a high school English teacher and a nurse. Our vacations were road trips to national parks, not jaunts to private islands. My parents taught me the value of education, hard work and integrity, values that seemed increasingly rare in Cole's world of inherited wealth and corporate politics. Cole had been raised in a 20-room mansion with household staff who knew his preferences better than his own mother did. His childhood photos showed a serious little boy in tailored clothes, standing stiffly beside his father at charity galas or sailing regattas. There were few pictures of him simply playing or laughing. I was groomed to take over the company before I could even read. He once told me as we lay in my small apartment, the sounds of the city drifting through open windows. Every decision was made with the Blackwood legacy in mind. My schools, my friends, even my hobbies. That sounds suffocating, I'd replied, running my fingers through his hair. He'd smiled sadly. It was my normal. I didn't know any different until college when my roommate invited me home for Thanksgiving. His family argued and laughed and hugged. They were messy and real. Our family dinners were like board meetings with better china. Our courtship unfolded cautiously at first. Cole was accustomed to women who wanted his money, his status, or the doors he could open. My indifference to these things both confused and attracted him. Our third date, he'd suggested an upscale restaurant where entrees cost more than my weekly grocery budget. I'd rather try that new food truck downtown, I'd countered. The one with the Vietnamese-Mexican fusion tacos. We'd ended up sitting on a park bench, sauce dripping down our wrists, laughing as Cole experienced his first street food epiphany. How have I never had this before? He'd asked, genuinely bewildered. Because you live in a bubble, I teased. A very fancy, very expensive bubble. Little by little I introduced Cole to my world. Discount movie theaters, weekend flea markets, the satisfaction of assembling IKEA furniture with nothing but sweat and cursing. In return, he navigated me through the unfamiliar terrain of his reality. The unspoken rules of high society, the exhausting performance of wealth, the subtle power plays beneath polite conversation. You don't have to change for them, Cole had insisted before my first Blackwood family dinner. Just be yourself. Your mother already hates me. I'd reminded him, straightening his tie. Maybe I should pretend to be someone else entirely. The dinner had been a disaster, with Vivian interrogating me about my pedigree as if I were a show dog. When she discovered my father taught high school, she'd actually winced. "Education is so important," she'd said with manufactured graciousness, "though I suppose public schools serve their purpose." Cole had squeezed my hand under the table, our private signal that we were in this together. After 6 months of dating, I'd taken Cole to meet my parents. My father had quizzed him about baseball teams while my mother pushed second helpings of lasagna on him. By dessert, Cole was helping my younger brother with calculus homework. Later that night, in the guest bedroom, my mother had prepared, separate from mine with a pointed look about respecting her roof. Cole had whispered, "I've never felt so normal. It's incredible." After a year together, Cole proposed on a Tuesday evening in my apartment. No fancy restaurant or elaborate setup. Just the two of us take out containers on the coffee table when suddenly he was on one knee. "I don't want the life they planned for me," he'd said, his voice thick with emotion. "I want a real life with you." The ring had been his grandmother's. Not the massive diamond his mother wore, but a simple emerald that had belonged to his father's mother, the one family member who'd married for love instead of advantage. The wedding was small by Blackwood standards, 60 guests instead of 300. We'd chosen a botanical garden rather than the country club. My dress was off the rack, altered by my mother's friend. The night before the ceremony, Vivian had called. "Cole, darling." Her voice had dripped with concern over the speakerphone. "It's not too late to reconsider. The prenup is written, leaves you terribly exposed. She could take half of everything." "Mother, Elizabeth is sitting right beside me," Cole had replied evenly. "And we've already signed the prenup your lawyers drafted. I'm just looking out for your interest." "This girl, my fiancée," he'd corrected firmly. "She's not from our world, Cole. She doesn't understand our responsibilities, our legacy." "Good. Our world could use some fresh air." The wedding day arrived with sunshine and a notable absence. Vivian had sent a crystal vase with her regrets, claiming a last-minute board meeting. Cole had been hurt but unsurprised. My parents had embraced him as a son, their warmth filling the void his mother left. The pressure didn't stop after we said, "I do." 6 months into our marriage, Cole came home ashen-faced from a private lunch with his mother. "She's threatening to vote against me at the next board meeting," he'd explained, loosening his tie with shaking hands. "Says my unfortunate marriage is affecting shareholder confidence." He'd laughed bitterly. Apparently, some high-profile divorce would be better for the company than a stable, happy marriage to someone without the right connections. "What did you tell her?" I'd asked, heart-pounding. "That she was welcome to vote however she pleased, but if she ever disrespected my wife again, she'd lose her son as well as her voting proxy." His voice had been steady, his resolve unshakable. Each challenge strengthened us. When Vivian spread rumors that I was pregnant before the wedding, I wasn't. We laughed it off. When she accidentally excluded me from the annual Blackwood Foundation Gala, Cole declined to attend as well. When she offered to buy me out of the marriage, an actual check slid across her mahogany desk. I'd torn it up and left without a word. What Vivian never understood was that her opposition forged something unbreakable between us. Cole and I weren't just husband and wife. We were allies against a world that wanted to separate us. Our different backgrounds became our strength rather than our weakness. My practical nature balanced his idealism. His resources supported my ambitions. Together we created something neither of us could have built alone. A partnership based on mutual respect, shared values and genuine love. Something Vivian, for all her wealth and power, had never experienced. In Cole's final months as he uncovered his mother's financial schemes, that partnership would become more important than either of us could have imagined. The phone call came at 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday in March. "Mrs. Blackwood?" The unfamiliar voice was gentle but clinical. "This is Dr. Romero from Mercy General. I'm afraid there's been an accident involving your husband." The rain-slicked highway. A truck driver who'd fallen asleep at the wheel. Cole had been returning from a late meeting in Philadelphia. They said he died instantly. The next hours passed in a blur. The sterile hospital hallway, the form they asked me to sign, the small bag containing Cole's personal effects. His wedding ring was still warm when I slipped it onto my thumb. I drove home alone in the pre-dawn darkness, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. Our house, the modest 4-bedroom we'd chosen instead of one of the Blackwood properties, was exactly as we'd left it. Coffee cups in the sink, Cole's running shoes by the door, his laptop open on the kitchen counter, waiting for him to finish the work he'd planned for the morning. I collapsed onto our bed, burying my face in his pillow. Still smelled like his shampoo. The doorbell rang at 7 a.m. sharp. I hadn't slept, hadn't moved. Through the peephole I saw Vivian's perfectly coiffed silhouette. Her driver standing at a respectful distance by the town car. "Elizabeth." Her voice was steady, her eyes dry. She wore a tailored black dress as if she'd anticipated the occasion. "I've made the necessary arrangements." "No, I'm sorry." No acknowledgement of shared grief. No embrace for the woman her son had loved. Arrangements. I echoed hollowly. For the funeral. Saturday at St. Paul's. The family plot is prepared. She stepped past me into the foyer, her critical gaze sweeping over our home, the one she'd called charmingly modest with thinly veiled disdain when Cole had proudly given her a tour. I've taken the liberty of drafting the obituary, she continued, placing a folder on the console table. Naturally, the board will need to appoint an interim CEO immediately. I stared at her numb with disbelief. Cole had been dead less than 6 hours and she was already securing her corporate kingdom. The funeral was a spectacle of wealth and corporate politics. Vivian had overruled my wish for a small private service. Instead, St. Paul's Cathedral overflowed with executives, business associates and society figures, many of whom Cole had actively avoided in life. I sat in the front pew, dress soaked with silent tears, while Vivian held court like a queen in mourning, accepting condolences with practiced grace. Her eulogy spoke of the Blackwood legacy and Cole's dedication to the family business. Not once did she mention our marriage or the life we'd built together. My father squeezed my hand throughout the service. My mother had wrapped her arm around my shoulders, glaring daggers at Vivian across the flower-laden casket. She didn't even ask what music he would have wanted. My mother had whispered angrily as the organist played Vivian's selections, formal traditional pieces Cole would have hated. That evening, alone in our bedroom while distant relatives and business associates mingled downstairs, I found myself staring at Cole's side of the closet. His favorite worn Harvard sweatshirt hung beside tailored suits he wore reluctantly. I buried my face in it, breathing in what remained of him, when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Mrs. Blackwood, this is Martin Reeves, your husband's personal attorney. We need to meet privately before tomorrow's will reading. Urgent, please call. The reading of Cole's will took place in the wood-paneled conference room of Reeves and Associates the following morning. Vivian sat across from me, flanked by the Blackwood Industries legal team, 3 stern-faced men in identical dark suits. My parents sat beside me, my father's hand protectively on my shoulder. Martin Reeves, a slight man with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, had met with me privately an hour earlier. What Mr. Blackwood is about to do will cause significant distress, he'd warned me. Are you prepared? I'd nodded numbly, uncertain what he meant until he'd shown me the documents Cole had prepared. The plan had been breathtaking in its thoroughness. Now as Reeves cleared his throat and began reading, I watched Vivian's face. Her expression of somber dignity remained fixed until Reeves reached the 3rd paragraph. To my wife, Elizabeth Clare Blackwood, I leave all my personal assets including but not limited to our home investment accounts and my controlling shares in Blackwood Industries, totaling 42% of the company's voting stock. Vivian's head snapped up. That's impossible. Reeves continued without acknowledging her interruption. To my mother Vivian Eleanor Blackwood, I leave my collection of first-edition Hemingway novels, which she gifted me on my 20th birthday, along with my sincere hope that she finds peace. The room had gone utterly still. One of Vivian's lawyers whispered urgently in her ear. Her face had drained of color. This is preposterous, she finally said, voice tight with controlled fury. Cole would never. Mrs. Blackwood, I assure you these documents were prepared by your son personally, with sound mind and full legal authority. Reeves replied calmly. The changes to his will were executed 3 months ago. Without consulting the board? Without consulting me. Vivian's voice rose sharply. There are family trust provisions, which Mr. Blackwood as primary beneficiary had full authority to restructure upon reaching the age of 35. Reeves explained, sliding a document across the table, as he did 14 months ago. The aftermath was immediate and brutal. Before Cole was even in the ground, Vivian had her legal team filing motions to contest the will, claiming I had manipulated Cole, that he wasn't of sound mind. When that failed to gain traction, she tried to invoke obscure clauses in the company charter. 3 days after the funeral, I returned home from a meeting with Reeves to find the locks changed on our house. A security guard, one I didn't recognize from the company, informed me that Mrs. Blackwood Sr. had ordered a security review of all Blackwood properties. You have no right, I'd said, voice shaking with rage rather than fear. I have every right. Vivian had appeared in the doorway, cool and collected. This house belongs to Blackwood Estates, a separate holding company. Your name isn't on those deeds. She was wrong, as Martin Reeves quickly established with a single phone call. Cole had quietly transferred the property 6 months earlier. The next day I arrived at Blackwood Industries to find my security clearance revoked and my personal items from Cole's executive suite packed in boxes in the lobby. A courtesy, the security director had explained, uncomfortably not meeting my eyes. Mrs. Blackwood thought you might want these before the transition is complete. The war escalated daily. Vivian called board members, investors, even our friends, spreading whispers about my emotional instability and concerning financial decisions. She arranged an emergency board meeting to protect the company's interests during this difficult time. What she didn't know was that I'd already met privately with 5 of the 9 board members, guided by notes Cole had left with Martin Reeves. The emergency meeting had not gone as she planned. A week after Cole's funeral, as rain streamed down the windows of our home, Martin Reeves arrived carrying a small envelope. "He wanted you to have this after the initial unpleasantness had played out," the attorney said, handing me a safe deposit box key and an address. The next morning I drove to First National Bank downtown. A solemn teller led me to the vault, verified my identification, then left me alone with the metal box. Inside was a sealed envelope with my name in Cole's familiar handwriting, a USB drive, and a small velvet jewelry box. I opened the letter with trembling hands. "My dearest Lizzie, if you're reading this, then I'm gone and Mother has shown her true colors. I'm so sorry to leave you to face her alone, but I've done everything I can to protect you and to finally hold her accountable. What you'll find on this drive is the culmination of 8 months of investigation. Mother has been moving company funds offshore for years. Tax evasion, falsified records, shell companies. It started small after Dad died, but it's grown into something massive and criminal. I couldn't confront her while I was still putting the pieces together, and honestly I was afraid of what she might do if cornered. So I made a plan. Everything is ready for you." The jewelry box holds my grandmother's sapphire, the one Mother always claimed was lost. Like me, it never really belonged in the Blackwood world. Now it's yours along with everything else I could give you. I love you more than I can say. You showed me what real family means. Always yours. Cool. I opened the velvet box with trembling fingers. The sapphire caught the vault's fluorescent light, brilliant blue against deep midnight. I slipped it onto my finger beside my wedding band as tears blurred my vision. The USB drive contained everything. Account numbers, transaction records, offshore holdings, forged board authorizations. The woman who had called me a gold digger had been systematically looting her own company for years. That night I made a single phone call to a former colleague at FinSang. The war with Vivian had just entered its final phase, and she had no idea she'd already lost. I spent the night reviewing the contents of the USB drive, each file revealing another layer of Vivian's elaborate scheme. According to Cole's meticulously organized notes, it had all started with a seemingly innocent discrepancy. 8 months before his death, Cole had been reviewing quarterly reports when he noticed an unusual payment to a consulting firm he'd never heard of, Meridian Global Advisors. The amount wasn't particularly large by Blackwood standards, just $175,000, but something about it had triggered his curiosity. It was the timing, Cole had written in his digital journal. The payment went out exactly 3 days after we closed the Singapore acquisition. The same acquisition Mother had initially opposed, then suddenly supported. That single thread, when pulled, had unraveled an entire tapestry of financial manipulation. Cole had discovered that Meridian Global was a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands, which led to another entity in Bermuda, which connected to a private account in Vivian's maiden name. I clicked through dozens of images, screenshots of banking portals, scanned documents with Vivian's signature, email exchanges with offshore financial advisors. Cole had even photographed physical documents from Vivian's home office during family gatherings, catching glimpses of paperwork when she stepped away. "Had dinner at Mother's estate tonight." Read an entry from 5 months before the accident. "When she went to take a call, I managed to photograph the Artemis Project files. The scheme is bigger than I thought. She's been siphoning funds for at least 7 years, possibly since Dad died. Conservative estimate, $30 million diverted through at least 6 different jurisdictions." The most damning evidence came from Cole's meeting with a former Blackwood accountant who had been abruptly dismissed 3 years earlier. The man had been reluctant to speak until Cole assured him of anonymity. He confirmed everything Cole had written. Mother fired him when he questioned wire transfers to numbered accounts. She claimed they were special investments authorized by the board, but no such authorization existed. He kept copies of the original transfer records out of fear she would come after him someday. Smart man. While gathering evidence against his mother, Cole had simultaneously been protecting me. There were detailed notes about consultations with the state attorneys, carefully restructuring his holdings to ensure I would inherit everything without legal challenges. He'd updated beneficiaries on insurance policies, investment accounts, and pension funds. He'd transferred property deeds, vehicle titles, and even his precious vinyl record collection into my name. "She'll fight you for every penny," he'd written. "But I've built a wall around our assets that even Mother's army of lawyers can't breach." The irony is that her own obsession with tax avoidance created the perfect if she challenges how I've structured my estate, she'll expose her own methods. I marveled at Cole's foresight, his attention to detail. While presenting the image of a dutiful son and CEO, he'd been meticulously documenting his mother's crimes and securing our future. The double life must have been exhausting, yet his notes never showed resentment, only determination and occasional sadness. One journal entry from 2 months before his death broke my heart. "Sometimes I catch Mother looking at old photos of Dad and me, and for a moment I see genuine love there. I wonder what happened to her when money and control became more important than family. I keep hoping she'll remember who she used to be, but I can't stake Liz's future on that hope. By dawn, I had a complete picture of both Vivian's crimes and Cole's counterplan. Blackwood Industries had legitimate operations in several countries, which Vivian had leveraged to create a complex web of financial transfers. On paper, everything looked like routine international business. In reality, millions were flowing through shell companies and ultimately into private accounts beyond the reach of American tax authorities. I made coffee and watched the sunrise from our kitchen window, Cole's grandmother's sapphire heavy on my finger. The next steps were clearly laid out in Cole's notes, but executing them would require perfect timing and nerves of steel. Vivian was powerful, connected, and utterly ruthless. One misstep could be disastrous. First, I needed to secure my position within Blackwood Industries. Cole had left me controlling interest, but Vivian was already challenging the transfer and lobbying board members. I would need allies. I spent the next 3 days meeting privately with key players. Harold Bennett, the company's longest-serving board member and Cole's godfather, was my first target. We met at his fishing cabin outside the city, away from Vivian's network of informants. I always wondered when this day would come, the white-haired man said after I showed him selected documents from Cole's files. Vivian changed after Richard died. The ambition was always there, but the moral compass disappeared. Will you support me? I asked directly. Cole trusted you. That's good enough for me. He'd paused, studying my face. But this won't be pretty. Vivian will burn everything down before admitting defeat. By the end of the week, I had secured commitments from 5 of 9 board members. The emergency meeting Vivian had called to oust me instead resulted in a formal recognition of my authority as majority shareholder. Her face as the vote was announced, shock morphing into cold fury, would stay with me forever. Next came the financial safeguards. Following Cole's detailed instructions, I worked with Martin Reeves to lock down every corporate and personal account Vivian might target. We changed signatories, updated access protocols, and implemented two-factor authentication on digital platforms. When Vivian attempted to transfer $3,200,000 from the company's operating account to an emergency reserve fund only she could access, the transaction was flagged and blocked. Mrs. Blackwood is most displeased. The CFO informed me nervously after receiving what he described as a thermonuclear phone call from Vivian. Mrs. Blackwood will need to adjust her expectations, I replied calmly. With my position secured and assets protected, the final step of Cole's plan arrived: accountability. This was the part he had left to my discretion with a simple note: justice or mercy, I trust your judgment, Lizzie. I spent a sleepless night weighing the options. Expose Vivian publicly, destroying the company's reputation and potentially harming thousands of employees? Handle it privately, allowing her to maintain dignity while quietly stepping away? For hours I wrestled with what Cole would want. Then I remembered his words from years earlier when discussing a competitor who'd been caught in an ethics scandal. The problem isn't that he broke the rules, it's that he thought the rules didn't apply to him. That kind of entitlement needs consequences. The next morning I compiled a carefully curated selection of evidence. Enough to prove criminal intent, but not so much that authorities could trace it back to Cole's original discovery. Then I contacted Daniel Friedman, my former supervisor at FinCEN, who now worked with the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. This needs to be handled through proper channels, I told him during our meeting at a quiet cafe downtown. Anonymous tip, formal investigation, everything by the book. He reviewed the documents with a professional poker face. This would trigger an automatic investigation. Significant penalties likely. Possibly criminal charges. I understand. The company itself could face repercussions. I'm prepared to cooperate fully to protect the business and its employees, I assured him. This is about one person's actions, not the company. 2 days later, I filed for an emergency board meeting to address regulatory compliance concerns. The agenda included appointing an independent auditor and creating a special committee on financial governance, moves that would appear proactive when the investigation became public. The anonymous tip to the IRS went out that same evening. Time to reach the agency just as I solidified my control over Blackwood Industries. The wheels of justice began turning. Slowly but inevitably, all according to the plan Cole had so carefully crafted. As I stood in our bedroom that night, looking at his side of the closet I still couldn't bear to clear out, I whispered, I hope I made the right choice. The sapphire caught the lamplight as I raised my hand to touch his favorite sweater, and I could almost hear his response. You always do, Lizzie. You always do. 3 weeks after submitting the evidence, I was reviewing quarterly projections in Cole's former office when my assistant knocked softly. Mrs. Blackwood, there are federal agents in the lobby. They have a warrant. I nodded calmly, though my heart raced. Please show them up immediately and call Martin Reeves. Tell him it's happening. The raid was methodical and overwhelming. 15 agents in dark suits and windbreakers emblazoned with IRS criminal investigation spreading throughout the executive floor. They presented warrants for specific financial records, electronic devices and access to the company's servers. Employees watched in stunned silence as boxes of documents were carried out and computers sealed with evidence tape. The lead investigator, a stern-faced woman named Agent Pearson, approached my desk with professional detachment. "Mrs. Blackwood, we have a simultaneous operation underway at Vivian Blackwood's residence. I'd advise full cooperation." "Of course," I replied, unlocking my computer. "Blackwood Industries has nothing to hide. I've already instructed our IT department and records management to provide whatever assistance you need." Her expression revealed nothing, but I sensed her surprise at my ready compliance. "I should inform you that we're executing search warrants at multiple locations, including 4 offshore entities connected to this company." "I understand. Would you like coffee while you work? It's going to be a long day." A hint of a smile crossed her face before she returned to her professional demeanor. "That won't be necessary. But thank you." Throughout the day I maintained an outward calm, directing employees to cooperate fully while secretly monitoring texts from Harold Bennett, who had connections within local law enforcement. His messages provided glimpses of the parallel raid at Vivian's estate. 7 vehicles at the mansion. Vivian attempted to deny entry. Warrant prevailed. An hour later, she tried to make a call to Switzerland. Agents stopped her. Not going well. By late afternoon, the agents at Blackwood Industries were packing up, having copied server data and collected dozens of boxes of records. I had just signed the final inventory form when my phone rang. Vivian's name flashing on the screen. "You little snake," she hissed before I could speak. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I believe federal agents are explaining that very clearly," I replied evenly. "They're tearing apart my home. 30 years of my life, my privacy violated because of some accounting discrepancies that could have been resolved internally. I closed my office door for privacy. Tax fraud of this magnitude isn't a discrepancy, Vivian. It's a crime. They're saying Cole was involved." Her voice shifted suddenly. "Calculating even in crisis. That's their theory. That Cole set everything up before his death and I was merely following his instructions. After all, he was Co." My blood ran cold at her willingness to tarnish her dead son's name to save herself. "What a convenient narrative. It's the obvious conclusion," she pressed. "The prosecutors will see that the poor man arranged these accounts to protect the family, then died unexpectedly before explaining the situation to anyone. A tragic misunderstanding. Is that what you're going with? Blaming your dead son for your crimes. It's called survival, Elizabeth. Something you understand quite well apparently." Her voice hardened. "Meet me at the house in an hour. We need to align our stories before this gets worse." "There's no our stories, Vivian. Only the truth. Don't be naive. You're implicated too now that you've taken control of the company. We're in this together whether you like it or not." I thought of Cole, of his meticulous plans and the justice he deserved. "1 hour," I agreed. "We'll talk." Vivian's mansion was in disarray when I arrived, drawers emptied and papers scattered across antique furniture. She sat in the library, a glass of scotch in her trembling hand, looking older than I'd ever seen her. "They took everything," she said without greeting me. "Computers, phones, even my passport. That tends to happen during federal investigations." She drained her glass. "I've already called Senator Morrison. This will be contained by morning." I sat across from her. "Your political connections can't help you this time. The evidence is too substantial." "Evidence can be interpreted many ways." She leaned forward. "Listen carefully. If Cole arranged these accounts, he didn't. If he did," she continued sharply, "and I merely maintained them after his death, this becomes a minor issue of improper reporting, not deliberate fraud." I removed an envelope from my purse and placed it on the coffee table between us. "Cole discovered your offshore accounts 8 months before he died. He documented everything. Dates, amounts, account numbers, your conversations with financial advisors in the Caymans. He has photos of documents from your home office, recorded phone calls, statements from former employees you threatened into silence." The color drained from her face. "He knew everything, Vivian. And now so do I. You can't prove the IRS has enough to charge you with tax evasion, wire fraud and money laundering. They don't need my help." I opened the envelope, spreading select copies of Cole's evidence on the table. "But if you attempt to smear Cole's name to suggest he was involved in your schemes, I'll make sure every document, every recording, every photograph becomes public." She stared at the papers, recognition flickering in her eyes. "He wouldn't have betrayed his own mother. He gave you every chance to stop. You chose money over your relationship with your son, over basic ethics, over the law." Her facade cracked, revealing a glimpse of genuine emotion, not remorse, but fear. "What do you want?" "I want you to accept responsibility. Plead guilty, make restitution, serve whatever sentence they give you with dignity." "You expect me to go to prison?" Her voice rose incredulously. "I expect you to face consequences just like anyone else would." I gathered the documents and stood. Cole deserved better than a mother who would blame him for her crimes from beyond the grave. "And you think you've won?" she said bitterly. "The secretary who stole everything." "I didn't steal anything, Vivian. Neither did Cole. We earned what we built together." I moved toward the door. "The difference between us is that I would give it all back in a heartbeat just to have him here again." In the weeks that followed, Vivian's world collapsed systematically. She was indicted on 17 federal charges. Most of her assets were frozen. Former associates distanced themselves, suddenly unable to recall their once close friendship with the Blackwood matriarch. With Martin Reeves' guidance, I began restructuring Blackwood Industries, implementing transparent financial practices and an ethics oversight committee. The company weathered the scandal surprisingly well once I made it clear that Vivian's actions had been hers alone, and that the new leadership was committed to full cooperation with authorities. 6 months after the raid, Vivian accepted a plea agreement, guilty on 3 counts in exchange for a reduced sentence. The evening news showed her leaving the courthouse, head high despite the circumstances. She would serve 28 months in a minimum security facility, with millions in fines and restitution. That same week, I finalized the paperwork for the Cole Blackwood Foundation dedicated to funding financial literacy programs in underserved communities. The irony wasn't lost on me, using proceeds from Vivian's restitution payments to teach others about ethical financial management. "He would have loved this," my mother said at the foundation's quiet launch event. "Using something broken to create something beautiful." A year after Cole's death, I stood at his grave with fresh flowers, the granite still seeming too new, too wrong. "We did it," I whispered, tracing his name with my fingertips. "She's facing consequences. The company is thriving with ethical leadership. The foundation has already funded programs in 3 states. I paused, my throat tightening. "I miss you every day. But I'm finding my way." The autumn wind rustled the trees overhead as I placed a small stone on top of his headstone. A tradition my father had taught me, a sign that someone had visited, that the deceased was remembered. Back at our home, still our home though I'd finally managed to clean out his side of the closet, I settled on the porch swing with a glass of wine. Tomorrow would bring challenges. A board meeting, foundation decisions, everyday life without Cole. But I had discovered strength I never knew I possessed. Vivian had underestimated me from the beginning. The gold-digging secretary, who turned out to be her downfall. She'd never understood that real power comes not from wealth or status, but from integrity and purpose. As the sun set behind the trees Cole and I had planted together, I raised my glass in a silent toast to justice served cold, to grief transformed into purpose, to the love that had changed everything, and to the woman I had become along the way.